So Croatia is in the euro now, so it's a bit more expensive if you haven't been there for a few years. But at the time of this filming in 2025, 100 euros would buy you 180 Australian dollars or 113 US dollars. So if you're coming from Australia, things are really expensive over in Croatia and Europe in general at the moment. The moorings in Croatia, they have two bases. I went out of the one in Agana, which is over by Split, Croatia, and they have a number of catamarans. The ones I'm going to focus on today are the Moorings 4500, which is the 4-cabin catamaran, and in a moment I'll talk about the Moorings 4000, which is a 40-foot 3-cabin catamaran. So the first boat I'll talk about is the one that we actually took on this trip. That's the Moorings 4500. And it's a 4-cabin catamaran with 4 showers, AC, all sorts of goodies, and technically can fit 10 passengers. So, it can fit 10 people, but with the 4 cabins, we found it very comfortable for 8 people, and we ended up with 7 people, which was a really perfect fit for the boat. There's a lot of room and a lot of different spaces on the catamaran, which I really liked. You had the aft deck. Everyone sat down in the evenings with a wine and some cheese and biscuits. You had the middle section with a really nice kitchen, another seating area, a little drop-down table. Up forward, you had an area with some hammocks you could lay in. They also had some really nice beanbag chairs. And we kept our kayaks and paddle boards off to the side there. So let's get to the cost. We rented the 4500, the 45-foot catamaran. That came out to 12,291 euro. That's fairly expensive in Australian dollars. That's over 22,000 Australian dollars and nearly 14,000 US dollars. And when you go by the week, that comes out to 1,536 euro per person. So one of the other options there in Agana Marina next to Split is the Moorings 4000. So that's their 40-foot catamaran with 3 cabins. And you know what? I think for most people, that might be all you need. If you don't need a skipper, then you could put 6 or 8 people on there, especially if it's a couple of kids. You're going to have plenty of room and definitely save a little bit of money. So the 40-foot catamaran from Moorings, that'll set you back 7,681 euros for the week, and that's over 13,000 Australian dollars. And if you break it down by person over the week, and I'm calculating that at 6 people, is 960 euros per person for that week. All right, we do have some extra cost associated with the boat for the week. And if you don't have the proper qualifications, one thing you're going to need is a skipper. So that's someone that's going to drive the boat for you. And just note, they do take one of the internal cabins, and you need to provide for their provisioning. So that means you're taking them out to dinner, probably buying them a drink here and there, and a tip at the end of the week as well. Yeah, another extra cost is the yacht's damage waiver, and that was 700 euros for the week for our boat. And you know what? I just think it would be fairly foolish to go out there without that. That covers you for most things. You want to definitely read the fine print and ask a bunch of questions. When you go in for your skipper meeting, you could ask them about the damage waiver, what's covered and what's not. But I would highly recommend taking the damage waiver. So we took on a couple of extra costs as well for the week, which were definitely worth it. One was a kayak. That was 172 euros for the week, and a stand-up paddleboard will set you back 153 euros for the week. And you know what? You're going to be in some really beautiful secluded bays and areas. The paddleboards and the kayaks were such a good decision, I think. It really gave us a break. A couple of times that we were out away from a dock or somewhere, people could kind of cruise around in the daytime, see all the fish. We also got a couple of snorkels with us, so it made for a nice little break during the day. So last couple of costs were the local VAT tax was just over 1,000 euros, and the prepaid fuel, which was just under 1,400 euros. And if I had to do it again, I would not pay for the prepaid fuel just because we usually cruised at a slower speed, so we weren't guzzling down the diesel. The modern cats get just amazing efficiency, really good mileage per liter of fuel. And on the way back, we ended up putting in, I think, about 400 euros of fuel on our last day. So you could see you could probably save a lot of money if you're careful with how fast you're driving and, doing mostly sailing. I would definitely skip the prepaid fuel. So the total cost for the boat over the week was 16,341 euro. Yeah, here's a little chart I made for the provisioning costs for the week. You can see a local beer is a couple of euros. If you go to a bar, it's going to be about 5 euros. We found most of the wine in the 20 to 30 euro price. A liter of milk will set you back 1 euro. And a dozen eggs at 2 to 3 euros is not a bad price. We only bought local fish a couple of times, and we bought them from local fishermen, and a kilogram was costing us just over 10 euro. So over the week, each place we stopped, we'd pick up a few provisions just for eating snacks during the day and, get some beer and wine to drink on the boat. And when we'd go out to restaurants, it was around 100 euro a person a head. That's just a good general thumb. You could obviously eat a lot cheaper than that. Unfortunately, some of the places like Sosula Bay, you had to go to Sismus to use their moorings. And so it was $100 a head, but you also got a free mooring for the night. So, those next few restaurants, about the same thing, 100 euro a head. And obviously you could spend a lot more if you're drinking a lot more or having more food. But we thought, about 100 euro a head. And that's so fantastic food, though, with that price. And really, the only time we incurred a lot more costs than that is when we tried to dock at Hvar. And we weren't able to get a space there. At the last minute, we went to the ACI Palmisano, and that was a really expensive marina. Yeah, there's a number of ACI marinas up and down the Adriatic, and it's definitely our most expensive day. I believe that was over 250 euros to stay that night. Plus, the dinner was fairly expensive as well there, and the drinks. And they had a little general store, but the same thing, the prices were really high. So that kind of gave a hit to the budget. But the rest of the trip got back to about 100 euros a day a person eating and got a few provisions here and there. So the rest of the trip wasn't all that more expensive. So over our week out in Croatia, the boat with the toys, the tax, that came out to 16,341 euro. And that was just over 2,000 euro per person. That's with 8 people on the boat. We also had 800 euro per person in food, and we probably spent more than that. Had 200 euro per person, miscellaneous expenses. That was some of the docking, mooring fees, a little lunch here and there, a couple of beers here and there. And so I had a total for our group just over 3,000 euro per person. Hey, thanks so much for watching, folks. Hope you enjoyed this breakdown on the cost of our one-week trip out to Croatia. And look forward to some more videos coming up on sailing in San Diego and sailing in Sydney. Once again, fair winds and following seas.